Hi there, and welcome to our first live Q&A for 2023. Real excited to be here with Coach Michelle.
It's true. Thanks for having me, and Happy New Year, and Happy New Year, everyone.
Yes, Happy New Year, everyone. And speaking of which, as we're waiting for people to drop in with questions for us, how were your holidays, Michelle?
Yeah, they were really good. So I was off last week, and it was a pretty relaxing holiday. I saw some family, friends, all of that, but overall, it was really, really nice. And I know, Daniel, you and I were talking before the holidays, and I'm in Canada. We were having tons of really intense snowstorms, and so we actually were expecting to possibly be without power for the holidays and have to do that. But so we got really lucky. It never happened. So we were all a little bit relieved. But I know everybody's travel plans got really disrupted, not just where I am, but in the US as well, and all of that. But we weren't too affected by any of it. So we kind of got lucky.
So glad. So
Yeah.
glad that you weren't. And yeah, speaking of travel plans, like or our plans, I should say, for the holiday, for Christmas at least, was that my cousin was going to visit from the East Coast. He's in New York, and he flew to Vegas and then couldn't get a connecting flight. He was going to come the following day, but then that got canceled, and he ended up not coming. So that was, a bummer. But otherwise, it was nice. We had pretty nice weekends, and yeah. See, we're already getting some questions. So should we jump in, Michelle?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's jump in and take a look. Brandon is here and says, "Hi guys, I've been avoiding my bedroom entirely.
Okay.
And only using it when I'm ready for sleep or sex. I've been sleeping better with only a few sleep disturbances from my nephews who are here some days. But I still wake up after 3 to 4 hours, and sometimes I can fall asleep, and other times I put pressure on myself. Any tips?" So let's understand this. So if I'm understanding, sorry, this next one. Brandon is just not sleeping in the bedroom and or avoiding the bedroom. Okay, avoiding the bedroom, but just going there when he's feeling ready for sleep, and generally has been sleeping better, but sometimes still wake up after 3 to 4 hours, and sometimes a little tricky there. But I guess the core thing here in terms of any tips is avoiding the bedroom until kind of being really, really ready for sleep, something of that nature. What do you think when you hear this, Michelle?
Yeah, this is really common. And I think this is, it comes from some of the more traditional CBTI teachings, right? Where it's the idea that insomnia is really coming from this association between the bed or the bedroom and wakefulness. And therefore we need to really avoid being in our bedrooms unless we are sleeping, right? Because we don't want to sort of strengthen that association or create it. And that was something that I was doing as well during my insomnia when I was doing CBTI, is I was avoiding my bedroom entirely. I would even keep the door closed. I wouldn't look in the bedroom. I was almost afraid to go in my bedroom because I was terrified of this association forming. And really, through learning so much more about it, it really freed me up to not be so concerned about this need to avoid the bed, at all costs other than for sleep. And part of that is something that we talk a lot about here, about how insomnia is really not about the fact that you've started to associate your bed with wakefulness. It's much more that you've started to associate wakefulness as a threat, or something that's dangerous and needs to be avoided. And so when you sort of shift your perspective that way a little bit, you can see that there's really no big need to avoid the bed so much, or to even develop, like I did, a bit of a fear of the bedroom and, in the daytime and all of that. And one thing that helped me with this was sort of looking back, well before my insomnia, and thinking, what's interesting is when I slept really well, I was never worried about, being in bed. I never avoided my bed. I spent tons of time watching movies in my bed, in the evening or in the day on the weekends, or talking on the phone to friends. I spent a lot of time in bed kind of whenever I wanted to and never thought about it. And I slept great. And so I thought, well, this doesn't really make that much sense, because otherwise I would have had insomnia back then. So that helped me let go a little bit. And what actually helped in part help me during my insomnia recovery was spending more time in my bed during the day, but doing fun things, relaxing things, so that I didn't feel so almost like as though being in my bed or close or in my bedroom in the day was something scary or negative or going to lead to something bad. So I almost kind of went in the other direction for a while to help create some more like, no, this is okay. This is a safe place. I can be in my bedroom at any time, and that's okay. And it's not a problem. And that it really helped me to do that a little bit, to let go of that need to avoid the bedroom in the daytime, essentially.
100%.
Yeah.
Wow, wow, so nicely said. And it reminds me of one of I think it was the first one who came as a guest on as a success story where we had a video too, and his name was Brian, and he said exactly the same thing, that he would actually intentionally like spend some time during the day in his bed doing something nice. And I was like, I remember hearing this and I was like, oh, this is like reverse stimulus control, it can be really helpful. And
Yeah.
now the only thing I wanted to add here for Brandon and anyone else was that when you hear what you just said, Michelle, you may go like, yeah, I don't really need to avoid my bed.
Mm.
And then the next step can be like, oh, I'm gonna, tonight I'm gonna go to bed like a little earlier than before. And then what can happen is that we have this, what I call like the change reaction. And just because we did something a little differently, we changed
Yep.
something, whatever it is, the brain can be like, oh, you changed something. What's going to happen now? And then we might have a little trouble sleeping that time. And then we can think, oh no, I did something wrong. But actually not. It's not that what we did was actually probably really helpful and nice. But whenever we change something, we can have a little bit of a hiccup there. So
Yeah.
when we see this, we're like, oh, this hiccup comes not from me doing anything wrong. It's just a typical change reaction, nothing strange or unusual. Then things get easier and easier. So I want to add
That's a
that one.
really important thing to know. And I even remember when I started doing this, and I think the first thing I did was allow myself to watch a movie in my bedroom. And it wasn't bedtime, and it wasn't, even the night. And I remember it just at first the feelings of anxiety coming up, right? Because it's like, oh no, you're doing something wrong. You've been avoiding this place. You've been told this is really bad. So you're right. Sometimes when we challenge these things, at first we can have a bit of that anxiety and stress response, that change reaction happening. And if you don't know that that's normal, right, then it can make you think, oh,
Yeah,
this was bad. I shouldn't have done this.
exactly. And you
Right?
go back. Yeah.
And you go back and it reinforces it when really it's so normal for that to show up. It's temporary, right? And it's happening because you've been intentionally avoiding and telling yourself this thing is bad, right? We shouldn't be doing this. This is some sort of threat. So very, very good point.
Very nice. Okay. Brandon, hope that made sense. And Libby's also here. And like Brandon, she's been, we've had questions from Libby in the past too. So Libby says, I find I'm still holding on to some fear when waking up in the middle of the night. This is especially the case if I wake up multiple times. By the second or third time, I'm anxious that it's almost time for me to get up, even if I don't look at the clock. Sometimes it passes in time for me to get back to sleep, but other times I lay awake until my alarm goes off. To me, if we go back here, this becomes a question of this, like, I feel like I'm still holding on to some fear. And sometimes we hear this, client students, refer to this as like, I feel like I'm sabotaging for myself. I feel part of myself doesn't want to let go, something of that nature. But yeah, what do you think when you hear this, Michelle?
Yeah, and it's tough because it would always be helpful to ask almost a follow-up question sometimes when I read these questions to know. But the first thing that came to mind, and you might have a different sense, is that it's the idea that there's still fear there. There's still fear that is naturally coming up. So, I'm not sure if it's more I didn't get the sense of self-sabotage. I could be wrong, but the idea that it's still there, why is it still here? Maybe. So some just residual fear, and how normal it is for it to still be coming up, right? As you're going through this, it doesn't just go away. It's not like there one night, gone the next, typically not like that. That's why we talk so much about speed bumps and how the recovery process is kind of this up and down. It's a bumpy road. And so that's what it sort of sounds like, Lippy. It doesn't sound like anything is actually anything that's out of the ordinary or unexpected. And it's much, much less about when fear is showing up or how much fear is showing up. And it's much more about how you are then choosing to move through the fear that is showing up. And that what is ends up being what is important, because that's what's going to help teach your brain that you know what, this I'm awake for the third time, but that's okay, right? That's okay. This is safe. And by the way, these feelings of fear, that's also safe for me to experience as well. So that's sort of my take on what
Yeah,
she's
and
saying.
which is exactly the same as mine. I would say that, when you mentioned like we have this residual fear, it doesn't go away by itself, or like it does go away by itself, but not necessarily quickly. Um,
Yes.
and sometimes when we have this residual fear, what sometimes can happen is that people say, like, why am I still afraid? Like I shouldn't be
Hmm.
afraid. Why am I doing it wrong? Like, and even thinking like part of me doesn't want to let go. I'm still holding on to it. But in reality, it's just when we're scared, it takes a little bit of time. Like we're not doing anything wrong. It's, just the residual fear fades like that. So it's no invitation for self-criticism, but just self-kindness and understanding, I think.
Definitely.
All right, let's see. Next we have Sarah here. Uh, who's, I guess, also goes by Sarsh, but she says, "Hi, my name is Sarah. I got sleep problems. What is your advice? I haven't slept for like 3 weeks. I took sleeping pills, and I don't want to take those for the rest of my life. Go to bed, but I can't fall asleep. I'm awake all night. Plus, I got kids who need to be in school, and I got anxiety, maybe desperation or depression. Please give me some tips. Who can help? I get to bed at 10 at night." Um, I want to say, like, I'll just jump in here and say, like, Sarah, I'm sorry to hear what's been happening, but glad you're here and found our channel. And when I hear this, these type of like questions, like, what can I do? What can I do? What's the advice? What's happening? To me, that it's difficult to say, like, do this or don't do that or something like that, because that so easily becomes its own effort. Like, oh, he said do this, so I can. It all becomes like an attempt to sleep. So I would say, like, if you just spend a little bit time here with like the playlists, specifically that This Is Natto playlist or the success stories, then I think you start to understand what insomnia is, what's going on, and then things will be more clear to you. And so I think that's like that would be kind of my initial impression there. But what do you think, Michelle?
Exactly the same is don't do anything. Start with education. Start with learning about what's going on, why this is going on, and just start there. I know that can be a little bit frustrating to hear, Sarah, when you're in something and you're like, no, like I need to, immediately do something. But part of what we talk so much about here is that you can't directly control your sleep the way that you would like to. And so we can't say, okay, we'll just get better blackout curtains, make sure it's really quiet. Right, we don't really go in that sort of direction. And so there's no quick fix, right? There's no one tip we can give, or there's no quick fix for it. And it really does start with that education piece, because then that sort of informs the rest. So you really do have to start there. I know that's kind of not the most. I know that's not the answer that you're looking for. I do understand that, but I think it's possibly the most helpful and honest one.
I think so too, and I think there's one thing I thought that we could add that could be helpful is, like, basically our teaching is all about the fact that when we don't do anything, you
Yeah,
know, there's no struggle. It helps by itself. But if
yeah,
we imagine somebody who's like scared, anxious, confused, worried, and comes to us and says, like, "What am I going to do?" and we say, "Don't do anything," it doesn't make any sense.
no, it makes no
It's
sense.
too big of a leap. So, which is like
Yeah,
education. Like, we kind of really need some education first.
yeah, it lays the foundation for all of the rest. And maybe we can leave her with a couple of high level sort of concepts about how we can't really control our sleep. And when we do, we're just adding a lot more pressure. And then pressure and sleep don't really go very well together. And you may have noticed that already in your experience, Sarah. And it's the idea that we talk a lot about how with insomnia, at some point, our brain has really learned a lot of fear around being awake at night, and even feelings of anxiety or feelings of fear. Like none of these things start to feel kind of unsafe and dangerous to experience. And then over time, right, we start to kind of, it becomes a bit of a pattern. And so we work a lot around understanding this and around helping sort of reinforce safety, and by really accepting what's going on. And I know that's really difficult, and that's why we talk about that do nothing approach is really all about accepting and letting go, as opposed to continuing to force and control and sort of add more and more stress and tension.
100%. So I hope that made sense to you. And we already said that it probably won't. It'll be difficult to make sense. But again, it's tricky. Hope it did, and at least pointed you in a helpful direction. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Let's go to this one. Sherry is with us and says, can the initial journey of the struggle be a bumpy one? I hear that lots of people start sleeping better quite quickly, but I feel that it's so bumpy. Yeah, what do you think when you hear this, Michelle?
Yeah, I would say
not just. I would say almost like, if I jump in like real quickly, there's like when we hear of somebody for whom it changed quickly, either it is that person didn't really have much insomnia to begin with. They didn't really have what we call insomnia, which is this kind of like ongoing struggle and the fear,
Yeah.
Or sometimes it can be like when people hear your story, Michelle, when you go back and hear your story, and you remember you got set it and forget it, and you read it, and it was kind of eye-opening, and things got easier, but it wasn't like a quick turnaround. No. And it was a lot that happened before too, right?
Yeah, and actually, I don't know if I should listen to I haven't listened to that since we did it, 2 years ago now, but things got better before they got worse for me. But I did have, it was the aha moment, and I suddenly had a lot of clarity, but the road itself was very bumpy. And part of my journey was at the very beginning, actually from my own excitement, I was like, oh my gosh, I was doing so many things. I had so many sleep efforts and routines and all this stuff built up around my sleep. And I thought, I'm getting rid of everything. And we were talking about that change reaction concept, right? Huge change I implemented overnight. And my hyperarousal went really through the roof, and a lot of just really, really intense. And I thought, okay, I actually need to slow down a little bit. And even then, for me, it was a process of you're changing the way you're working with your own fear, your own anxiety, right? You're no longer avoiding. You're staying, you're showing up, you're teaching yourself how to move through it differently. You might also be changing certain behaviors like sleep efforts, which we talk about as well. So you might be, literally stopping doing certain things that maybe you've done for a long time that feel like safety blankets to you. And so all of this can actually create a situation where sometimes you might have a bit more anxiety, more hyperarousal, and less sleep when you start to, start a new approach, right? That change reaction, same idea. And so I had that certainly. And I would say my whole journey was a bumpy one, for sure. I think none of it, I can't think of anybody that I've worked with actually that's had any sort of smooth or linear recovery process. It's just a bumpy road. It's part of it. And just like insomnia itself, the more you can accept and allow the bumpiness of it, right? It creates a little bit more ease around the process itself, as opposed to, really fighting against and resisting the bumpy road.
100%. 100%. Very nicely. Okay, so let's look at this one from Lisa. Lisa says, I sometimes experience phantom sounds, auditory hallucinations when I wake during the night and try to return to sleep. Is this a normal part of hyperarousal? Wow, nice good question. And I can go first there and just say that when somebody basically says like, has the kind of idea that this is probably normal, and just kind of like, just wants to kind of confirm that, if you will, that always makes me encouraged. And again, nothing here is a medical device, but the fact that you're already thinking of this as like probably normal is very nice to me, and it's kind of encouraging, and something that it makes me glad to hear. And I want to say that yes, there are many things that happen, like when we transition into sleep or out of sleep, that can seem like bizarre, like these sleep-wake transitional things. Sometimes it is a jerk. Sometimes we're kind of aware of falling asleep that wakes us up. Sometimes it is an adrenaline rush. Sometimes it is hearing something, seeing something that we later realize it wasn't real. It was some type of hallucination. Sometimes it is a loud boom in our head. Sometimes people have that, like a loud noise. And anyways, my point here is that, yeah, there are many wake sleep transitionings that are just, an expression of hyperarousal. They may be things that happen all the time that we didn't pay attention to, or they may happen actually because we're hyperaroused. But yeah, when we think of them as not as this is strange, I have to do something to make this go away, but rather, yeah, this is something many people have, and nothing strange or unusual, then automatically things become more peaceful, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And absolutely right. And I think the only other thing I was thinking of is oftentimes when we're very hyperaroused, our senses can be elevated or amplified. So everything can feel quite amplified as well. So just to put that out there as well, that can tie into that experience too.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, very well. Let's do one more here, which is Matura Miro. Why something like insomnia happen and multiple problems in my whole life come with this season of life? Sometimes it feels like the whole world is pushing you down. Insomnia should be enough. Oh, I think the question here is like, when we have something like insomnia, for example, why is it that then many other things seem to be kind of like add on to that? Like, anxiety, depression, like maybe why is it like insomnia, it should be enough? Why all these other things at the same time? And my thinking, if I jump in first there, is that oftentimes we get these questions like we have. I have, should I like, can I get past my insomnia knowing that I also have depression, or do I have to address my anxiety before, or things of that nature? And the way I think of it is more like they're really all expressions of the same thing. They all these inner struggles we have, they come from the same place. They come from a place where we're trying to avoid some kind of uncomfortable emotion or experience. And the more we try to avoid it, the more it actually becomes amplified. And that's the tricky thing. So to me, when I hear this, I'm thinking we can have like this one night where we don't sleep and our brain for some reason thinks that shouldn't happen. And then our natural response becomes like, I had to change this and do something about this. And then we have more struggles. And that can become almost like a habitual way where you react to other things. Like, oh, now I felt a little sad. Oh, I have to do something about that. Now I felt this. And so the avoidance can sort of like be kind of a general thing. We do that in other aspects of our lives, and suddenly we feel like there are many things going on at the same time. But really, it all boils down to that little avoidance that started maybe with insomnia and can move and can create some struggle for us in other areas of life too, is what I'm thinking when I hear this. But what do you think, Michelle?
Yeah, very similar, right? And I think one of the words that you used, Maturo, the difficult season, I do think that sometimes all of us will go through difficult seasons of life. All of us will experience this, whether it's insomnia, whether it's something else. And sometimes it happens along with insomnia. But these difficult seasons are never permanent, right? We move in and out of them. And when I was in my insomnia, I remember feeling like this a couple of times as well, where I thought, well, I'm already dealing with this. This is so hard. It's so unfair that this is also happening right now. And I think part of it is that when you're going through insomnia, everything else feels harder, right? So it just suddenly feels like something that happens it's now amplified. It feels heavier, tougher, all of it. As compared to if you wouldn't have had the insomnia happening. So I think that's part of it too, is everything ends up feeling kind of harder when you're in it. And I do understand, and I think it's difficult, but kind of going back to what you were saying, Daniel, is part of it is it's coming all from the same place in terms of like how we work with our own inner struggles and our own inner resistance to what is actually happening in life, right? To reality, essentially. What is our relationship to reality? And I know that's kind of maybe a bigger concept, but that's quite relevant in the context of this. And how are you responding, to all these things that are happening? And you had mentioned, Daniel, that idea of resistance, right? If you're pushing back against the insomnia and you're in a state of resistance, which is one of the things that keeps it going, you might be doing the same thing with these other things that you mentioned that are coming up and making life difficult. And a lot of the times when we're in a state of really fighting against these things that we wish were not happening, it makes them harder to go through, right? Really more difficult. And then it can feel, again, like heavier, and harder to handle, essentially. So just that's sort of my initial thought on reading that.
Yeah, no, very well said. And we will conclude there. I hope that was helpful to you, Matteo Miro, and everyone else who joined. Thanks so much for your questions and for being here, part of our community. And we look forward to seeing you next Wednesday or sooner. Right?
See you next time, everyone.
Okay. Bye, Michelle.
Bye.